Hello, everybody. Thanks and welcome for making the time available to join us today. We're having a panel discussion today on pharma and the digital future of healthcare. And I'm joined here by a fantastic group of people from the pharma industry, but also from one of the tech giants, Amazon. So I think it's an interesting group, and it will provide for some interesting perspectives on this topic. Before we dive in, perhaps it's good to do a round of introductions, and I'm just going to circle around the screens. So I'll start with Anna. Would you be able to introduce yourself and the organization that you're coming from?
Very happy to. Very good morning, everybody, and it's a pleasure to join. My name is Anne Witt. I'm Global Head Digital Business Development at Novartis, leading our digital strategic partnerships across our enterprise. Digital is an important platform for us at Novartis, coming back to the 200 years of the data that we have accumulated to unlock the data and also be at the frontiers of accelerating the digital innovation in this space. I have a dual science background and business background, have been with Novartis now for 7 years, always within global business development. And it's a pleasure to be here in this panel and have this discussion this morning.
Great, thanks a lot, Anne. Moving on to Thomas.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Thomas Thestrup. I'm representing Lundbeck. I sit in our corporate digital strategy, or corporate business development and strategy team, where I'm partly involved in our digital strategy and looking at digital opportunities for Lundbeck. So Lundbeck is focusing on CNS, as you might know, and this is obviously a very interesting space to be in digital health when it comes to mental disorders, mental health. So maybe we can get back to that later. I have a PhD in neuroscience and protein engineering from Max Planck, and been in venture capital and BD roles. Latest before joining Lundbeck, I was at UCB Pharma, where we also did some strategic investments in digital health, real evidence companies and the like. And yeah, last year we were running a digital corporate strategy project where I was heading that up together with our corporate IT team as well. Nice to meet you all.
Thanks, Thomas. Moving on to David.
Hey, good morning. My name is David Braun. I'm working for Merck as the global head of business solutions of connected health. At Merck, so working and supporting all 4 core franchises in terms of digital health and connected devices, product development and launch across the world. So supporting patients, HCPs, payers. So looking more at the products we put in the hand of patients and HCPs than the internal digital transformation of Merck. I have a background of engineering and applied physics. I'm now into medical devices and digital health for the last 10 years, I would say.
Great, thanks, David. And Claudia?
Yeah, nice to meet you. I'm Claudia. I am from Takeda Digital Ventures, which is the digital health venture arm of Takeda. So Takeda is a global, value-based and R&D-driven biopharmaceutical leader. It is headquartered in Japan, and it is guided by committed to patient, people, and the planet. And Takeda Digital Ventures it only invests in companies that mirror Takeda's value. So we are attracted to put the patient first, and we are attracted to companies that they do the same. So we invest in companies that have technologies, capabilities, or even business models that are strategically important to Takeda. And we are also financial investors, so we deliver top quartile venture-like financial returns. Myself, I'm Italian, but I'm based in Denmark. My team is based all over the world, a little bit in Switzerland, Austria, and Denmark and San Diego. and I'm trained as a mathematician. So I have a PhD in applied mathematics, but I've always worked with medical doctors. So I think that I can say I've been doing digital health since more than 10 years now, but I started doing investments in 2017 out of a fund in Basel, where typically the SAX forum is held. And then in last December, I moved to TDV.
Great. Thanks for joining. And Guy?
Hi, Thijs, and hi, everyone. Good to see everyone. So Guy Spiegelman. I'm based out of Tel Aviv in Israel, but originally from Sydney. And I lead up the work that Amazon and AWS does with healthcare and life science startups and the ecosystem around those startups across EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And that role really is about partnering with venture capital firms, with accelerators, incubators, other places where healthcare innovation happens. And bringing the power of the cloud and services like AI and machine learning to accelerate how we bring solutions to patients, whether it's through the pharma channel or through medical device or through healthcare systems. As opposed to everyone else on this call here, I've only got a Bachelor of Arts in journalism. But my career's been in startups and in venture capital in healthcare and life sciences for the last 20 years. And it's great to be here.
Great, thanks, Guy. Perhaps also a short introduction on myself. My name is Thijs. I'm a junior partner at INKEF Capital. We have a 500 million VC fund investing in healthcare and technology. So we really understand what it takes to bring a drug to the market, but also what it takes to build a scalable tech stack. So we try to bring that knowledge to the companies that we invest in. A couple of examples are Castor, who are providing a data solution to run decentralized clinical trials. Another example is Aidence, using AI technology to detect lung cancer on CT images. And I can give a couple of others, but I think that gives a flavor. Other than that, I have a medical background, started off as a doctor, did research in diabetes. In the end, ended up as a strategy consultant. And I think 10 years ago, decided I wanted to move to the digital health side, founded a digital health incubator together with AMC, the University of Amsterdam, and Duke University, and then joined INKEF since 2016. So really looking forward to this discussion. I always like to have a little bit of a controversial statement and to bring something in that is a little bit different. So one of the key things that we see is in our daily lives, technology is so intertwined, right? And if you look at the way you book a flight, if you look at the way you order your groceries, if you look at the finance industry, the way you do your banking, there's so much technology involved. And I think from that perspective, you could almost say that healthcare is trailing. And why is that? Why is healthcare trailing other industries in digitization? And what can be done to catch up? Who wants to go first? I guess Thomas, this one is probably one that you would love to comment on.
I don't know. I can certainly try. Just bear in mind it's 2 a.m. in the morning here. I'm sitting in Boston right now, and so it's really a late night for me here. But I can try to say something clever, hopefully. But no, I agree, Thijs. It's interesting when you look at all the other industries, how they utilize digital across. But I also think we have to acknowledge that some of these industries have also gone through a transformation, right? Think of banking, or it's not that many years ago that they were trying to figure out what customer needed and wanted from a digital point of view, right? So that's the transformation they've gone through. But I think it all ended up being focused on what the customer really wants, right? What the needs of the actual customer is. And that sort of drive the where you head with your products. So I think pharma can certainly learn from looking at these transformations that have gone through in other industries. I think we have a challenge that our products usually go through third parties first. So we usually do not sit with them and sell directly to the customer. So it's not a B2C model we have. That plus a lot of regulation, right? I sort of puts a stick in the wheel sometimes for what we can do and how we can accelerate, because a big part of what we do has to sort of be forced through regulation also. So I think it's a multiplayer game where we hopefully combined as an industry can look at how other also regulated industries have transformed using digital. But I think, you can really get a lot of inspiration from looking from product-centric companies also and understand what they are doing.
If I can jump in. Look, Thijs, probably the first thing you learned in medical school was do no harm, right? And I think that inherent, and I think sometimes positive conservatism, let's be honest, is something that is quite ingrained, not just at the clinician level, because really it sort of seeps into everything that we do, because we're about improving patient and the human condition. But most importantly, we don't want any innovations to take people backwards. Now, that I think has then it's a cultural sort of norm in the industry that is spread wide. Now, we're seeing changes because, doing nothing is not always the best thing to do, obviously. And I think what we're seeing is now, and the COVID pandemic has really helped us see this, we don't have a choice but to innovate and adopt technologies. And so if you speak to, I have a neighbor who's a doctor who would never have done a telemedicine appointment 2 years ago. And now it's like, can I do a telemedicine? He prefers to do it. And so what we're seeing is, and then if you take that to the big hospital level, and we see this in AWS very clearly, the discussions we're having today are not why should we go to the cloud? It's how do we do it, right? And so we are seeing, maybe trying to bring the conversation a bit forward. I think we're at a new point, and I think we're seeing some success stories coming, out across the world. Therapeutics coming to market faster because of digitization. We're seeing that it's working, and so I think we're at a really good point now where we can balance that do no harm and that really important value in medicine with let's innovate for the benefit of the patient.
And I agree with that. I think some of the challenges has been also the fact that for pharma companies, it has been a difficult journey to go into technologies, and for tech companies, it has been a difficult journey to understand the customer, the patient, and the healthcare ecosystem. I mean, and we see Apple getting in, getting out, Google getting in, getting out of the healthcare space. I mean, everyone is challenging. I think today we have learned to partner, to collaborate. And I think the success of digital health is going to happen through collaboration. Of course, adoption is much higher. I think we all have learned through successes and through failures. And failure is a success if you learn from it. And so I agree with what Guy had just said. We are at a good point to really now take it from there and make it beneficial to all the stakeholders, patients, HCPs, payers, pharma, and startups.
To build on your point, David, I also agree. We are moving now from a digital first to really a patient first strategy and a business model that is much more adapted to put the patient in the center and create those triple win solutions across the different stakeholders of our industry. And I think that's the recipe that we see the inflection point from, inertia, arguably, from an innovation standpoint, now rapidly accelerating and moving us and propelling us to the next frontier of what digital health can mean for our industry at large. And that's quite an exciting time to be in the industry and to also form those value-creating partnerships.
Great. And Claudia?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Guy said, that even in my opinion, the healthcare industry has to deal with something extremely precious, which is the patient, which is everyone's health. And the problem is that when it comes to innovation and digital innovation in healthcare more than in other industries, it is important to understand first what outcome a certain innovation brings to the patient. So if this outcome is not proven yet, you have to have a roadmap to get there. So I think that this process requires time, and I think that it is time well spent, because it is basically the time that healthcare stakeholders take to select what really makes a positive impact on the patient's life. Then COVID accelerated definitely. COVID, what in my opinion accelerated was the fact that digital health could prove their value, could say, listen, we really have positive impact, because what they could do, it was delivering healthcare services during a healthcare crisis. So, and I think that, as everyone said, we are on the right pace of digitization. From the startup point of view, there has been a lot of capital also that is pouring into startup. I think at Q1 2021 was another record of capital that was invested in digital health companies, and this definitely will keep us on the right pace.
Great, thanks. So a lot that I hear is actually a theme coming through. So Thomas, you mentioned that, you know, because other industries are more consumer focused, that there's such more relentless focus on digitization. And I hear then Anna say that, you know, the focus in Novartis is shifting towards the patient. And I think technology is a great enabler to have that contact with the patients, learn from them, look at outcomes, what Claudia was mentioning. So in that sense, I think it all is coming together, and I think as Guy said, right, we're living in a time where everybody's moving to the cloud, everybody recognizes the opportunity, and it's definitely an exciting time to see what direction it will go. So perhaps, you know, thinking more about the startup perspective, right? Claudia, you mentioned it. How can startups succeed in partnering with pharma on the digital side? And perhaps, you know, can you give some examples of successful partnerships?
Definitely. So as I was saying at the beginning, one of the important criteria for us to invest is companies that are strategically aligned with Takeda. And one of the, the first pillar for Takeda is the patient. So we really look at companies that are patient-centric, and this is the first step, in my opinion, to achieve a successful partnership. I can make an example. We have a portfolio company in our fund, and the name is Sixter. So when we invest in a company, we also try to open doors inside the organization. We are not the business development guys, but we definitely open doors for our portfolio company to speak with the relevant stakeholder inside the organization and to explore possibility of partnership. So what Sixter does is a platform that gives healthcare consumers everywhere they are the access to their health data, whether they are coming from EHR, genomics, wearables, and other real-world data. So they solve this data interoperability issue, but I think that they use their advanced technology to achieve a higher goal, which is putting the patient in the center and giving the patient wherever the healthcare consumer, giving the healthcare consumer wherever they sit, the control on their healthcare data. So I think that this was one of the reasons why they were successful in signing a partnership with Takeda, and they are supporting Takeda in different contexts, in real-world evidence, in matching inclusion and exclusion criteria in clinical trials, identifying responders or non-responders. One even more concrete example is that Takeda has plasma-derived therapies business unit, and it is developing, it is creating state-of-the-art and digitally connected donation centers. And Sixter is partnered with Takeda, especially in these centers, to make it quick and easy for the donors to pre-check eligibility criteria and go through the onboarding process. So I think that this is one of the examples how Takeda is partnering with other digital companies to really unleash the power of data and digital and improve patient outcomes.
Great, thanks. Anna, any examples on the Novartis side?
I think the trend that we are seeing here is clearly a shift and a move away from those single point transactional fee-for-service pilot agreements that Pharma was known for in the past, to truly set us up for success in a value-creating partnership framework. So to align upfront what is the problem to be solved, what are the jobs to be done, but also be very patient-centric in that approach, to define mutual benefits in a partnership. Partnership can have many currencies. Also, to have a joint contribution around a balanced contribution of resources, be it the contribution around financial, people, data, in-kind contributions. And also to set us up from a partnership perspective with joint decision making. We have seen in the past many pilot agreements where initial partnerships fail by not having proper alliance management support, steering committee, decision-making and governance structured around it, to from day one to also have a good understanding what does success look like and walk backwards to those key clear KPIs and exit criteria as well to define where do we want to head, what are the North Stars. To give an example, I mean, we have many partnerships, also many that are not disclosed. But one recent one is personally very exciting is a partnership that we have with Kaiku. So Kaiku is an oncology-focused patient-reported outcome platform based in the hospitals, but also with a patient-facing interface where we are co-creating and co-developing specific modules to track melanoma symptoms, but also management guide and truly patient education tools. And this is an example where we arguably have structured it in a way that we have an interconnected healthcare ecosystem play and can tap and put the patient in the center. So this is one example, but there are others, and we also have bigger collaborations with larger companies, including with AWS, working on those platforms. So it's the balance between truly the value-based partnership approach from small startups, but also going all the way to the bigger strategic collaborations.
Great, thanks. So Guy, what is your contribution in your experience? How you see startups partnering with big pharma in this case?
Yeah, I think startups partnering with big pharma. I think there's a few areas that we see that happening. I mean, there is let's I'm actually going to take this discussion towards R&D. So what we're seeing on the drug discovery and clinical development side is a lot of really fantastic scientists who have formed startups around AI and drug discovery. And I think we're starting to see in the last 1 to 2 years the first real fruits of those partnerships where we're actually getting targets being discovered and and because these startups have been able to innovate and use high performance computing that's more cheaply and freely available in terms of the access to it, and then really we've seen R&D departments in different pharma companies coming together, sometimes even working collaboratively to sort of take advantage of these platforms. So I'm talking about companies like Cytoreason, who just announced a partnership with Pfizer in Israel, and there's actually quite a long list. And so I think that's a really exciting space, and we've got some collaborations we're going to be announcing soon in that area. And then on the digital front end space, we have a company that has been working with AWS for many years and works with many of the pharma companies called MediSafe, which is essentially the adherence digital companion for plenty of therapeutics. I think those kind of things that we're going to see, and I think those are the obvious cases. What I'd like to challenge this group, because everyone talks about being patient-centric, and I love that. I'm patient. Amazon we pride ourselves on being the most customer-centric company on earth, and everything we do is customers. But who is really the customer here? I'm asking you, my friends on the panel, because even if now I'll take myself as a patient. If something has clinical value and a digital innovation, let's say, has clinical value, actually, I want to know if my clinician agrees with it and supports it. Because when I'm a patient, if something has clinical value, I want someone else to approve it, my doctor, okay? And I want someone else to pay for it, actually, because if it's going to help me, then my health system should pay for it, my government should pay for it, or however that works. And so while we say we're patient-focused, I think we need to add patient and clinician-focused when we talk about these things. I don't think we're going to see a true revolution in the digital technologies that are partnering with pharma or with health systems until we have both the clinicians and the patients on board. And if we just if we ignore the clinicians, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice.
I think you're touching a very sensitive point, and indeed, I mean, digital health. I mean, it's been now 6 years that I'm trying to to find the route to success, sometimes better than others. But indeed, one of the key challenges is identifying who is your customer. You know, in business, there is a user, there is a payer, there is a decision maker, and here you have the patient, you have the caregiver, you have the HCP, you have, which can be a physician, it can be a nurse from a patient support program. What's the benefit for the pharma company? What's the benefit for the startup that is developing it? So co-creation or co-value creation, I think, and it has been said also by Anna and by a few others, and listening to each other and identifying what's this common denominator that will satisfy everyone and that will make the clinician recommend your digital solution to the patient. And the caregiver telling the patient, you know, make sure you don't just download the app, but you use it, and you use it on a regular basis, so that you can also, as a pharma company, get the data that you are looking for, and so on and so forth. So indeed, it's, first of all, I think we've made a lot of progress in being patient-centric, because it was not obvious for pharma companies, right, that were used to give a pill to a patient and, you know, go get your prescription and I don't want to hear anymore from you. That has drastically changed. I mean, even at Merck, we have created a design thinking, usability, human factors team, and this is, you know, the first thing we do is go and listen to the patient and get inputs, but we also involve nurses, we involve physicians, and this is one of the key challenges. Well, how do you make it, you know, how do you create value for all those different stakeholders, not to mention the payer? This is a challenge, but I think, again, we are getting there through learnings, but you need a very important point that you mentioned.
Any thought? Great, thanks, David. Any thoughts from you, Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Guy and what David just said. That was also what I tried to allude to in the beginning, right? That this is, we're not the only one who can move this forward, right? We have to have several stakeholders on board, and each of them have to trust and engage with each other in the right way. So I completely agree, and I also think as a patient, I would prefer that if I come with an app with a certain data output, my doctor agrees that this is, you know, valid data. So I completely agree. And then I think, and also touched upon a few things in terms of partnerships, because I'm not going to dive into specific ones, but I think what we've really seen internally is the ones that actually work out are the ones with the right internal champions, right, and the right dedication and the right support from as high up as you can get. That has at least been our experience so far. I think we another thing that just crossed my mind when you were talking is also from where we sit. We're a mid-sized pharma company, and we're not as big, and we probably do not have as much money to deploy as some of the other panelists have into this space, and that really changes the game also. So and you mentioned piloting, and I think it's good to hear that pharma is moving away from the piloting, because also more and more of the startups prefer long-term partnerships with not just a one-stop project, right? But I think we're probably still a little bit there. We are still testing out our new strategy, being active in digital, and I think this is a challenge for us, right? Because we will go out and engage with the startups that have now done larger deals, strategic deals with larger companies, and we come and ask for a pilot because we're not entirely sure what the output is in the other end, right? So there's still, you know, an elastic effect in the industry, I think, depending on the size of the company and the money you can deploy to investigate.
Thanks, Thomas. I think that's an interesting perspective. One of the key things I always hear from startups that I work with is that especially the timelines to work with pharma are challenging. Startups typically have funding for a period of maybe 18, 24 months, and some of these agreements take very long to get established. Is that something that the people on the panel recognize, and are companies thinking about accelerating this process in a more experimental way, that there is a staggered approach to start off with small pilot projects, but then branch into scaling fairly quickly once you've achieved something? I don't know, David, I see you nodding a lot.
Yeah. I fully recognize that pharma is not the fastest company. I mean, I've been working prior to pharma into consumer electronics, for example. I mean, completely different world. and pharma had difficulties to understand what digital means and why developing an app is not like developing a drug, and why the risk of failing with an app is not the same as the risk of failing with a drug and not getting the FDA stamp on your drug. I mean, it's different type of timelines, of budgets, and of risk to the patient. But again, I think during the last 5 years, we have gone through it. We have been able to change the mindset to show all the R&D and business people that were used to drugs and not to digital, that it's a different world, not completely different, of course, but that we have to be faster than the patient. You know, when you launch a drug, you invest a lot, but then the drug is going to remain on the market for the next 20, 50 years, probably, until a generic is coming. When you launch an app, the patient is expecting an update every 3 months, every 6 months. Completely different timeline and frequency of release and launch. How do you deal with, how do you launch digital health when you have sales reps that the only thing that they know to sell is a drug or a prefilled syringe, and now you want them to talk software? So it's really a mindset that we had to change. Again, we are getting there, far from being perfect. I do think at Merck that we are way faster today than what we were a few years ago. Also in the way to define the product and explaining our partner what we want, on selecting the partner, making sure that we have the right contracts, that it's a win-win, that we take them for the value they bring and that they take us for the value we bring, and that we listen to each other. You know, in the past, the startup was so happy to work with a pharma company that they were saying yes to everything, even if we were going completely south, because they say this is the customer. They certainly know what they want, which was not necessarily the case. Today, we're really able to establish a partnership that makes us move way faster. And we know that it might not be super right from day one, but then, you know, with agility, we are improving, we are adjusting, and we are getting there. And I would say that the time to market that we have achieved today, from ideation to first usage by a patient, I would say has been divided by 2.
Perhaps to add to David's point, I think all pharma companies are on a journey where we have seen arguably a lot of acceleration coming is now through COVID. Suddenly, we were all in our home offices or are still in our home offices. And we have seen that we needed to embrace new customer channels and also embrace how we bring drugs to market and rethink our traditional commercial model. I think those inflection points are key to actually spur innovation and to bring us also to the realization that we have to rethink now in order to be successful for the future.
I want to add, Thijs, to your point about how can we improve the sort of hit rate and the success rate of this collaboration between startups and pharma. And I think, you know, what Anne said before, we're not looking at digital first, we're looking at patient first. So I want to just maybe sort of make that a slightly more generic and call that use case first, and say, if we're focused on, and 2 things, focused on the right use cases, meaning identifying the right challenges and use cases within the pharma where startups can maybe provide a solution. But being very much focused on the challenge before you actually engage with the startup, because, you know, then there's more likelihood that the pharma will use that startup solution. Right, if the challenge or use case is well defined. And the second thing is around how do we create the mechanisms within the pharma organization to scale up successful initial pilots, or whatever you want to call them, initial engagements, let's call them, with startups, once we sort of hit those milestones that we're looking for. And creating that scale mechanisms for external digital innovation, that's something we've actually been working on with a number of pharma companies. We're bringing some Amazon models of innovation, and we have a program even called Rapid Open Innovation, where we work together with pharma teams and their use cases, and not just then find the right startups, but also develop those scale mechanisms. And I think we're going to see more of that. We're going to see more finesse around how we can make this successful, because, you know, I think up till about 2 or 3 years ago, you know, innovation leads at big pharma or even hospitals basically were a point of sort of gaining access to what's out there. And so we want to know what's out there, and we then filter that information back into our big corporate saying, hey, this is what's out there. And the startups were like, oh, we get access to our potential customers And that was kind of where it ended, right? And there was some false expectations and people getting disappointed from both sides, right? I think we're moving beyond that now. I think there's a recognition that there's a lot of value when it works. Let's try and break down where it's not working and tackle that. And so, this is just one example of the Rapid Open Innovation Program where we're trying to help both sides do that.
Yeah, I just have to say I like hearing that. I think it's the right approach. We have probably had the hard learnings also of expectation too high, going out and getting starting a partnership and not really bringing that value out of it that we expected because we didn't ask the right questions at the right time. And I think so we're really backstepping now. An example could be when we're now engaging with, don't want to say a hype word, but AI and machine learning based sort of drug discovery companies, right? I think research have really done a good job now trying to ask themselves, what is really the problem we want to solve for? And what are the key questions we need to ask the companies now that we're assessing them, right? So we really can map them out and say, this is the company we need to solve for this specific problem. This is the company for the other problem. So going forward like that, I think it's going to help us tremendously internally and also really to have the stakeholders happy, right? So I think that's a good approach.
Great point. Any thoughts from you, Claudia?
Yeah, I think that, to build on top of what has been said, I think that building a culture that it is open and it is trained on data and digitization across the entire pharma company is important to keep the right pace on the adoption of digital technologies. Takeda has a partnership with AWS and Accenture to really become cloud-driven, a cloud-first company, and the idea is really using then digital technologies and data-driven innovations along the entire pharma value chain. So patient first, but patient first is not just whatever is direct to patient. It can be something that brings value to the patient. It brings value to the patient through other channels. Yeah.
Great point. And I think also a nice bridge to the next question, because if you look at the pharma value chain, where is the biggest potential for digitization? And I think the reason for asking this question is, with a relentless focus on the patient, you miss out on all the people working on drug discovery from the early stages to designing the clinical trials, getting the insights from the clinical trials, and then turning that into the evidence that supports a drug hitting the market and identifying the specific patient populations. And I think there's so many use cases along that value chain. If you now take a step back and look at this pharma value chain of drug discovery, commercialization, clinical trials, where do you think is the biggest potential for digitization?
I think so. If I may, I think there are opportunities along the entire value chain, but and everything that you mentioned is definitely important. I have an example from a part of the pharma value chain that you didn't mention, but I find quite interesting. Which is the supply chain. So, for example, at Takeda, we are partnering with Cloudleaf, and Cloudleaf is an IoT solution that is collecting a lot of measurements like temperature, location, humidity of goods that in our case they are like biotherapeutics and life science products, and this is extremely valuable for tracking plasma and other biotherapeutics conditions during the supply chain. So this is an example of how you can provide a value to the patient, because you're sure that biotherapeutics and plasma are stored correctly, even if it is not direct to the patient. And this is an opportunity in supply chain, which is part of course, the pharma value chains that maybe it's not mentioned that often like others.
No, that's a super interesting example, and I think the reason for it also being, why I think it has traction is also because of the fact that, it's a relatively simple solution, and it's not a lot of complexity that you have, multiple stakeholders involved to decide whether or not you want to apply this technology. It's basically changing the status quo and improving it with a relatively simple solution. So I think that's a great example. Any other thoughts, David, perhaps?
I think I agree with Claudia. I mean, there are opportunities across the value chain. I think it's probably a different approach. I think at the beginning there was, we're talking about digital, and it was kind of a buzzword, and we put everything in the same basket, from a basic, software that you use to connect to an equipment in a quality lab, all the way to a solution for a patient, to AI and machine learning for accelerating your R&D, or for identifying the right patients for your oncology clinical trial. And I think that, yes, they're all digital, but sending an email is also digital. So we have to be a bit careful on how do we segment that, and how do we approach those different problems. And indeed, solving a problem in supply chain is a different approach than creating the right product for a patient or a physician, or of bringing the right technology that will help you to reduce the clinical trial, timeline, budget, and making sure that you onboard the right patients on treatment, or that you accelerate your R&D overall. So the opportunities, there are plenty of the opportunities. I think it's important to prioritize them. It's important to understand that those, yes, it's digital, but there are different topics, and that you don't make digital projects just for the sake of making a digital project. You use digital as a tool to solve a problem. It's right when you talk about a solution for a patient or for an HCP. At the beginning, we all wanted digital because it was fancy and it was kind of a marketing tool. Today we understand we need to solve a problem. And then you use digital as a technology. You use the cloud as a technology that helps you solve a problem. You use an app to help you solve a problem, or you use a smart algorithm to help you identify the right patients for a clinical trial. And I think that's what is at the core of all those different solutions. And I believe that in 10 years from now, those digital teams may not exist anymore, because they will be embedded in everything. Today, it's more about, again, the mindset that we need to change in the big pharma companies, about educating people, and about helping people to understand that those technologies exist and that can help them solve the problem they are looking at.
I think at the core of all of this is data. Data really sits at the center. Digitization is really just about how do we've got tons of data across every part of the value chain, whether it be R&D, clinical development, manufacturing, commercialization, and patient surveillance. Like, those are sort of like the entire train. So, for example, Anne can probably talk about the stuff that we're doing together on the manufacturing side, AWS and Novartis. We've announced this together, and there's so much efficiency and improvement. It's not for the sake of digitization, they're using the word digital. It really is about improving and transforming that entire process, because we now have resources that we can build proper data infrastructures, federated data lakes. We can link up our R&D efforts and our manufacturing and make predictions what's going to work better in manufacturing at the R&D stage, as a way of choosing which molecules, and which mRNAs, and which all of that goes forward in development. So the transformation is not for the sake of it. It really is about bringing therapeutics to market faster, and it is across all parts of the value chain. I can't, in this case, I can't give you a clear answer. It's best for R&D, it's best for commercialization, it's best for manufacturing. It's the whole thing. And at the center of it all is understanding that, and the now technologies that allow us to unlock a lot of the data, but while maintaining the rigorous compliance and privacy controls that we need to have in place. I think we're able to do those two things now simultaneously, which is part of the key to unlocking all of this innovation. And it was a blocker before, and I think we're now reaching a point where it's much less of a blocker.
I'm also most excited about those cross-functional platforms where you start with the data capabilities, and arguably AI ML tools are only as good as the underlying data sets. But if you have now the pull-through of the data set from R&D all the way to the patient and can have feedback interactive loops going back to and inform your start of the value chain and throughout, that's where we see arguably the power. We are still on a journey. I don't think we have made yet the tectonic shift that we have seen in other industries, such as finance. But we are on a great road. And I think the power to unlock data will be key here. And that comes with also a mind shift that we have discussed earlier today. It's the mind shift, the culture, and the type of people that we are also bringing in to work together. And working together in new business models that arguably come from very juxtaposed positions. You have big pharma, traditional asset focused. You have the tech players with a very bigger cloud software component, and trying to merge those two things. And from my perspective, that can only be merged if we put the patient in the center and then build the stakeholders around, to your point, Guy, around the specific use cases that we can work on together.
Thomas, you've been working on Lundbeck's digital strategy as well. So, any thoughts more from the smaller, medium pharma perspective?
I think there were some good points raised there. I was actually happy that sort of production and logistics came up here also, because sometimes we fail to mention that part of the value chain as well. I just, through the pandemic, I think that was actually probably one of the value chains that really performed well because they were prepared. They have already adopted a lot of the technologies ahead of time, and maybe that's also because that's part of the value chain that is similar to many other industries, right? It's at least closer to other industries, and I think they were really on par with and really showed that being up to date and using technologies can make things happen and run also during a pandemic. So I think kudos to that department at least. But yeah, I mean, I think David also had a lot of good points on where, and it's actually, digital should disappear as a topic because it's about a technology that solves a certain problem, right? At the end of the day, and also at the end of the day, I think for where we at least put our bets is where we can reduce the time to market, right? It's about the dollar at the end of the day. And so if we can reduce that research project by 1 or 2 years, that's a lot of money in the other end. So it's also going to be a financial aspect that drives where we put in the efforts.
Look, just in one area, patient selection, okay, that can take months, right? Oh, yeah. In clinical development. And why does it take months? One small part of that is in oncology, data is so disorganized, and it's usually these huge notes from an oncologist, right? And if they happen to be typed into a system, we're in a good place, because then we can run NLP processing on that, add a sort of comprehension layer and a medical comprehension layer. So AWS has a service called Comprehend Medical, which can take an oncology report and literally in milliseconds extract all the relevant information, add a bunch of rules onto that. And instead of taking months of time of nurses literally reading oncology reports, saying, oh, this is a candidate for this trial, in minutes. And so it's just one part of the whole process that we've talked about. What Thomas was saying, we need to shorten time, right? And that's part of the value, bringing value to the patient and business value. And we shouldn't be shy about that. Those things should be synchronized. And so here is where technology and digitization and AI/ML and good data, all of that comes together, where we can see how we take a process that takes 3 or 4 months and make it 2 days. Okay, and that's when we're bringing value, and it's happening. I want to give an example from healthcare, but not necessarily from pharma. When things work, how amazing it feels. So, how many of you have done more than 20 COVID tests? I mean, I'm in that list, right? And in different countries, it's very different how it works. In Israel, we have really good interoperability. It's a big buzzword in healthcare. But when I went to the city council to do a COVID test, the next day, the result landed in my electronic medical record of my health maintenance organization seamlessly. And unfortunately, one of those tests came back positive a couple of months ago. I'm fine now, everyone. And then within an hour, my doctor called me to tell me what to do. I didn't have to do anything as a patient, right? So when you get digitization right and interoperability right, the patient experience and ultimately the health outcome is going to be better, right? My level, when you get that positive result, you're anxious, you've got all these other things going, but I had it. Within an hour, call from my doctor, don't worry, this is what we need to do. This isn't the check-in process. And so, I know it wasn't a pharma example, but it was a healthcare example. When things work well, the patients and everyone feels it. And I think that we're getting there. I think we're getting to see those wins. That's also a big part of digital any transformation or innovation. You need to see early wins to help motivate everyone to do that change management. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're starting to see. It's an optimistic kind of note there.
I just want to say I think the patient recruitment is a great one, because I've been in meetings where you sit with clinical experts and a digital company that has recruited tenfold the patients in half the time, right, or even a fraction of the time, and their jaws drop to the table, and they say, how did you manage to get 2,000 patients in 2 weeks, right? Or and it's also just really knowing how to get to the patients, right? It's fun to see.
Great. I love the point about where follow the money for the startups. I think it's a great piece of advice, right? Where can you create incremental impact, that there's a clear business case so that you can justify also investments into innovation. And I think we always try to work with our startups to do that. And I think throughout the value chain there are these opportunities, but really understand the business model, understand your customer as a startup, because I think it always starts there, and really understand what the pain points are and see how your solution fits in to optimize that business model. And I think you named a clear example with inpatient recruitment. I think that's where you see immediate return on investment, because a market introduction that happens 3-6 months earlier is of course a fantastic business case. All right, maybe one last question around how does pharma stay relevant in an age where incumbents are disrupted by digital first companies? Because you see a lot of investments also by the big guys. David, you mentioned Apple is in, Apple is out, Google is in, Google is out. We're sitting here with somebody from Amazon, one of the other FANG companies. So what is the panel's perspective on this? Is this a threat? Is this something pharma needs to think about going forward?
I think all industries are prone to be disrupted, and disrupted through startups that arguably come with a much more leaner business model and can think through tectonic shifts much easier than a big incubate can. We have seen industries, photo industry, Kodiak, prime example, that have shifted quite significantly in the past 10, 20 years. Now, the question is with Big Pharma, how can we engulf also the rising tide of innovation? And I think it's the shift in mindset that we have discussed earlier in the panel. It's the shift to also foster new skills and structure our organization in such a way that while we are a big tanker organization, there are still pockets of innovation that can be cultured around having the startup mentality. And it's also following how budgets are allocated and empowering our key product leaders to think through autonomously with the right authority to make the decisions, and similar kill also projects earlier and pivot and not hang on for 2 years to it's a big extreme to an idea to push forward in a big organization, but to have the nimble attitude and the pivot ability to direct innovation.
I have to jump in here because you mentioned the big guys, right? So, I like to think, definitely from our perspective, from AWS's perspective, we're there to help actually and do what we call the undifferentiated heavy lifting. There's so much heavy lifting that you need to do around data, around high performance computing, around AI, ML, around security, privacy. Why should Novartis have teams of experts on that, when really they can work with us as a trusted partner to take a lot of that away, so Novartis can focus on what the really important patient-centric solutions that they need to bring to market. That you don't need to be an expert in managing it. Well, obviously not the data center side or the regions that we manage. They don't need those experts anymore because they can rely on us or other public cloud providers to do that. And I think that I'd like to say it's in reverse, that by letting technology companies and like AWS to actually take care of these components, it will free up resources for innovation and agility at our customers. And we've seen that across industries, and now we're seeing that as well. With Takeda, with Novartis and the other pharma companies that we work with.
Great. I'm also looking at the clock and making sure that we finish on time. Is there any other thoughts or from the panel at this moment around this topic?
Just a quick thought that so there are plenty of opportunities to create synergies between pharma and digital first companies. I think that one of the initiatives that we have done at Takeda Digital Ventures is being a founding members of the Impact Society, which will be launched which was launched on the 1st of October. And what it is a pre-competitive collaboration between digital health companies that comes together to really thought through what it is a virtual first approach in healthcare. So I think that sitting at tables like the one of the Impact Society is a great way for companies to really stay at the forefront of what is the innovation and what will be the new healthcare delivery model.
Great. I think I need to round off at this moment in time, but I'd like to thank all the panel members for their contributions. I think it's been a very interesting discussion, and I suggest we keep this recording, watch it again in 10 years, and then see how much of it has come true. And I hope that we inspire people to, start collaborating with industry, because I do think, we have a major task. I think everybody sees the potential, but it's all about getting the collaborations right, getting, the multiple parties at the table, and making sure that we achieve more digitization together. And I'd like to close off with that and thank all the panel members for their contributions today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.